She fainted in the middle of the Hartcliffe ball, and the Duke caught her before the floor could. It happened between one breath of violins and the next. Cordelia Vane had been standing very straight beneath the great chandelier, her gloved hand resting on the rim of an untouched glass of ratafia. And then, the candle light had folded sideways like a fan closing, and the warm crush of the ballroom had gone thin and far away. She felt herself going. She had time for exactly one thought. Not here. Not in front of all of them. And then her knees were no longer hers, and the painted ceiling tilted, and two hands closed around her arms hard enough to bruise, and held her up. When she opened her eyes, she was looking at his cravat. She knew the cut of it before she knew anything else. She knew the faint scent of cedar and cold air that clung to him. She opened her eyes, saw who was holding her, and decided she would rather have hit the floor.
Miss Vane?
His voice was very low, pitched for her alone under the music. Look at me. She did not look at him. She looked instead at the third button of his waistcoat and made her spine into a thing of iron. I am quite well, she said. You are not. Your Grace will set me down. He did not set her down. He turned her, smoothly, so that his shoulder hid her face from the room, and walked her. It was unmistakably walked, his arm a bar under hers, her feet barely her own, through the nearest doorway into a small green anteroom, where the air was cooler and the music came muffled through the wall. Only then did he let her stand on her own, and even then he kept one hand a half-inch from her elbow, the way a man stands ready to catch a thing he has not yet decided to trust. Sit, he said. I would prefer to stand. I am aware of what you would prefer. He turned the heavy gold ring on his smallest finger once with his thumb, and looked at her with an attention she had spent 2 years avoiding. You have grown very good at preferring things that cost you nothing to say. Sit down before you fall again, Miss Vane, and I promise to pretend I have not noticed that your gloves are mended at the seam. She sat. Her own pulse betrayed her. She could feel it knocking hot and fast at the inside of her wrist where the glove ended, and she pressed her thumb flat against it without thinking, an old habit, counting against the panic that pressed cold at the back of her throat. The room smelled faintly of beeswax and cold hearthstone, and the green cloth dust of a chamber little used. Julian Ravenscar, Duke of Hartcliffe, stood over her in the green anteroom of his own house, and the single candle on the side table threw his shadow across the wall in a long bar that did not move, and its small flame leaned and steadied in the draught off the window. He had asked her to marry him once, on a night very like this one, in a room not far from this one. She had said no. She had never told him why. She was not going to tell him now. I shall return to the dancing, she said, the moment my breath is recovered. I should be obliged if your Grace would forget the last 5 minutes entirely. No, he said. The word was so plain, so without heat, that it took her a moment to be sure she had heard it. She lifted her chin. I beg your pardon. You asked me to forget it. He set his hands behind his back. I am declining. I have spent 2 years forgetting things at your request, Miss Vane. I find I have run out of the appetite for it. Julian had seen her come in. He had not meant to be watching the door. He was the host. He had 400 guests, and a mother who wished him married, and a cousin who wished him managed, and he had every reason to be looking anywhere but the entrance to his own ballroom at 10:30. But he had felt her arrive the way one feels a draught from an opened window across the room, some change in the air, and when he turned, there she was, at the top of the stairs in a gown the deep violet of a bruised iris, her dark hair dressed simply because she could no longer afford a maid who knew the fashionable knots, and the sight of her went through him exactly as it had gone through him the first time, 3 seasons ago, and the last time, 2 years ago, and every time between. He knew things about Cordelia Vane that she did not know he knew. He knew that the Vane carriage that had set her down at his door tonight was hired, not kept, because he had recognized the jobmaster's grey from the rank at the corner of Mount Street. He knew that she had dismissed all but 2 of her servants in the spring, because his own steward had mentioned, idly, that the Vane house in Brook Street had not ordered coal from the usual merchant since March. He knew that her father, the late Sir Henry Vane, had been lost not to the gout the obituaries named, but to the slower thing that comes of watching one's fortune go out the door faster than it comes in. That the man had mortgaged and remortgaged and borrowed against a name until the name was all that was left, and that he had left his daughter nothing but that name and the bills. He knew all of it, and he had said nothing, because the one time he had reached toward her, she had cut his hand off at the wrist with a single, smiling, unanswerable no. So he had learned to watch the door and say nothing. And tonight, standing by the great cold fireplace with a glass he was not drinking, he had watched her cross his ballroom, with that straight back and that mended glove, and that face composed into perfect indifference. And he had seen, because he had been watching for 2 years and knew her face better than his own, the moment the composure flickered, the slight sway, the hand that found the edge of the table, the way her colour, already too pale, went the grey of old paper. He was moving before she fell. He had crossed 30 feet of dancing couples and caught her before the thought had finished forming. And now she sat in his green anteroom, with her thumb pressed to her own wrist and her chin in the air, telling him to forget it. And he had run out of the appetite for it. "There is nothing to forget," she said. "A warm room, a tight stay. It is the commonest thing in the world for a lady to come over faint at a crush. You make a great deal of nothing, Your Grace." "When did you last eat?" The question landed wrong. He watched it land. Her chin came down a fraction. "That is a remarkable thing to ask a woman you have just declined to forget." "When?" "At dinner, as one does." "You dined at home alone, then, before you came? On what?" "On none of your concern," she said pleasantly, and rose, and the room tilted again, gently this time, and she put her hand flat against the wall and stood there with her eyes shut and her jaw set, mortified past speech, while the Duke of Hertcliff watched her hold herself upright against his wallpaper, and did not, for once, say a single word. He rang the bell. A footman came, and the Duke gave a low instruction Cordelia could not hear, and the footman went, and the Duke crossed to the window and opened it himself rather than waiting for anyone to do it for him, which she found, against her will, that she noticed. London came in on the cold, the wet stone smell of the street after the day's rain, the rattle of a late dray, a man somewhere calling the hour. She breathed it. It steadied her more than anything in the bright, airless ballroom had. "You opened the window yourself," she said, because she needed to say something that was not the truth. "I find it goes faster than ringing twice." "A duke who opens his own windows. Lady Sabine would be appalled." Something moved behind his eyes at the name, quick and gone. "My cousin is appalled by a great many things. It is one of her chief occupations." The footman returned with the tray, a cup of beef tea, steaming, and a plate with bread cut thin and buttered, and a small dish of stewed plums. Ordinary food. Nursery food. The sort of thing one feeds a person who is not well, with no ceremony attached to it at all. The Duke took the tray himself, and set it on the little table by her chair, and stood back. There was a small bowl of sugar on the tray. She did not touch it, and she saw him notice that she did not, and file it away with the mended glove and the rest, in that quiet ledger he seemed to keep of her. "I am not hungry," Cordelia said. "I did not ask whether you were hungry. I asked when you last ate, and you would not tell me, which is an answer." He nodded at the tray. "Eat the bread, at least, or I shall be obliged to stand here all night, and I am told I am tiresome company when I am being stubborn." "You are told correctly." "You see how honest my acquaintances are with me. Eat the bread, Miss Vane." She looked at the bread. It was thin and pale, and the butter had begun to melt into it, and the smell of it, warm bread, simple as a kitchen, made the inside of her mouth ache in a way that frightened her more than the fainting had. She had eaten that morning. She had not eaten since. There had been a choice, that afternoon, between the chandler's bill and a proper dinner, and she had paid the chandler, because a Vane house must have candles lit in the front windows when the world drove past, or the world would know. She took up the bread and ate it, slowly, with as much disdain as it is possible to bring to a slice of buttered bread, and the Duke turned to the window and gave her the courtesy of his back while she did it, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the music came through the wall, and that, the bread and the open window and the turned back, was the most dangerous thing that had happened to Cordelia Vane in 2 years. Why did you say no? She had known it was coming. She set down the empty cup. The beef tea had put a little warmth back into her hands, and with the warmth came the strength to lie well, which is the only strength a Vane is permitted. Your Grace must be more particular. I have said no to a great many things. It is a lady's chief privilege. 2 years ago. He had turned from the window. He was watching her again, with that level, patient attention that she had come, over 3 seasons, to dread more than any cut direct, because it did not judge her, and it did not let her go. In the library at Hartcliffe, I asked you to be my wife, and you said no before I had finished the sentence, and you smiled while you said it, and you have crossed every ballroom in London since then to avoid being in a room with me. I should like to know why. Vanity, she said lightly. I did not care to be a duchess. You are a worse liar than you believe, Miss Vane. You have a tell. She kept her face perfectly still. I have no tell. You press your thumb to your wrist, he said, as you are doing now. She looked down. Her thumb was flat against the inside of her wrist, against the knock of her own pulse, and she took it away as though the skin had burned her, and hated him, briefly and completely, for having watched her closely enough to learn it. I think, she said, rising, and this time the room stayed where it was put, that I have trespassed on your Grace's hospitality long enough. I am recovered. I shall make my goodbyes to your mother, and call for my carriage. It is hired, he said. The grey from Mount Street. It will not come until you send the boy, and the boy is in my kitchen being given his supper. So you have a quarter of an hour at least. Sit down, Cordelia. It was the first time he had used her name. It went through the formal air of the green anteroom like a stone through a window, and she stood quite still in the wreck of it, and the only sound was the muffled violins and the knock of her own pulse, which she would not, this time, touch. 3 mornings later, a footman in Hartcliffe livery delivered a parcel to the house in Brook Street. Cordelia received it in the front parlour, which was the only room she kept fires in because it faced the street. Inside the parcel was a book, a small, cloth-bound volume of botanical engravings, hand-coloured, the kind a lady might keep on a side table, and a note in a hard, square, decided hand. Miss Vane, you said in the anteroom that you had never seen the spring gentian, only read of it. Here is one. I make no apology for the liberty. You may return the book, but you will have seen the plate, and I shall consider the exchange in my favour. Hartcliffe. She read it twice. She turned it over, as though there might be a trap on the back. Then she put it on the mantel, face down, and she did not write to thank him, because to thank him would be to begin something, and she had nothing to begin it with but debts. That afternoon, the Duke called. She had Besom, the one remaining maid, who had been with the Vanes since Cordelia was 6 and stayed now for love and back wages, tell him she was not at home. She watched from behind the parlour curtain as he received this on the step, and put on his hat, and turned to go. And then she watched him stop, and look up at the front of the house, at the windows with their bravely lit candles, burning down good wax in the middle of the day. And she saw him understand. She saw him read the candles in the daylight windows for exactly what they were. His face did not change. He went down the steps and got into his curricle and drove away, and she let the curtain fall and stood in the cold front parlour with her heart going like a hare's, because the worst thing in the world had happened. Someone had seen. He came again, miss, said Besom the next day, plumping the one good cushion with unnecessary violence. And the day before. That's 3 calls in a week from a duke, and you turning him off the step like the fishmonger. My own mother would rise out of her grave. Your mother is in excellent health in Clapham, Bessem. Figure of speech, miss. Bessem set down the cushion and looked at her with the flat, fond, immovable disapproval of a woman who had buttoned her into her first stays. He's a fine-made man and no mistake. Shoulders on him like a barn door. And he sent a book. A book, miss. A gentleman as sends a book is a gentleman as has been thinking, which is more than most of them manage from one season to the next. He has been thinking, Cordelia agreed. Which is precisely the trouble. Trouble, Bessem said, and sniffed, and went out, and her parting shot floated back down the cold passage. If a man with that pair of shoulders and the better part of Yorkshire is trouble, miss, I should like to be in trouble myself before I'm too old to enjoy it. Cordelia laughed before she could stop herself. One short, startled laugh in the empty parlour, and then put her hand over her mouth as though she had said something indecent, because she had not laughed in that house in a long while, and the sound of it frightened her. She met him next, where she had not braced for him, which was, of course, the only way he ever managed to get past her guard at all. It was at Hookham's circulating library on a grey Tuesday, among the high oak shelves and the smell of paper and dust and beeswax, where Cordelia had gone because a subscription to a library was the one luxury she still allowed herself. 3 guineas a year bought a whole winter of evenings, and a borrowed book burned no coal. She had the botanical volume he had sent her under her arm. She had told herself she was returning it, and had walked the whole way composing the cool note she would leave with it, and had got as far as the long room at the back, where the natural histories were shelved, when she came round the end of a case and found the Duke of Hertcliff sitting in the window seat with a folio of engravings open across his knees and the thin grey light on his bent head, entirely alone, entirely unaware, reading. She might have withdrawn. She had become very good over 2 years at the silent withdrawal. The half-step back, the turn on the heel, the gliding exit before the eye is caught. She stood at the end of the case and did not take it. She watched him instead, for the length of one held breath, the way he had so often watched her. A man at his ease, his guard down, his thumb following a line of engraved Latin across the page, his mouth moving very slightly over a word. He looked younger, so. He looked like a man who had no 400 guests, and no managing cousin, and no mother who wished him married. Like the boy he must have been before the dukedom came down on him, before Anthony went off and did not come home, before he learned to stand by cold fireplaces with glasses he did not drink. Then he turned a page and saw her, and the ease went, and the level composure came down over his face like a man putting on a coat against the weather. And she was sorry, absurdly, to have cost him it. Miss Vane, he rose. You are returning the book. I am returning the book. You walked. In this. He glanced at the streaming window. You might have sent it by the boy. The boy, said Cordelia, is in your kitchen being given his supper, or so I am given to understand he generally is. She set the volume on the table between them, plate side up, the spring gentian open to the light, blue past believing. I have looked at the plate. You may consider the exchange in your favour, as you threatened. It is a very fine flower. I have never seen it growing. It grows on the high pasture above Hertcliff, he said, in May. There is a particular fortnight when the whole hill comes blue at once, and then it is gone, and you must wait a year. My grandfather used to walk up to see it the first morning it opened. He said it was the only appointment in the calendar he never broke, because it was the only one that did not wait for him. He looked at the plate, not at her. I've not been up to see it in 3 years. One forgets, in town, that there are appointments worth keeping. Why not? Because I have spent 3 Mays in London, he said, watching a particular door. It was said so plainly, with so little weight, that it went in under her guard exactly as the truth in the anteroom had, and she had no armour ready for it. And she did the only thing she could think to do, which was to pick a quarrel. You should not say such things to me, Your Grace. It is not fair. You know quite well I cannot answer them, and you say them anyway. And then you look at the picture, so that I shall not have to meet your eye. And it is a kind of cheating. It is exactly a kind of cheating, he agreed, unrepentant. And at last he did look at her. And there was something at the corner of his mouth that on a less governed man would have been a grin. I have a very poor hand, Miss Vane. I am obliged to cheat. An honest player in my position would have folded 2 years ago. And Cordelia, against every resolution she had carried in with the book, laughed. The second laugh in a week, here in the hush of the library, where a clergyman, 2 cases over, lowered his gibbon to frown at them. And the Duke of Hartcliffe heard it, and she watched the sound of it go into him, and do something to his face that no amount of governance could put down. And she understood, with a small, cold lurch of the heart, that she had just handed him a far more dangerous thing than any answer. They stayed an hour. They did not mean to. He showed her the folio he had been reading, a Swedish thing, the plates of northern flowers hand-tinted in faded blues and golds, the paper soft and cold under her bare fingertips. With the Latin he translated badly, and a wit he did not. And she corrected his Latin, which she had from her father, who had taught her the old languages himself, because there was no money for a governess, and a man must do something with a clever daughter. The Duke received the correction with a humility so patently false that it made her laugh a third time, and the clergyman, 2 cases over, rustled his gibbon in protest, and the grey rain ticked steadily against the high windows, and somewhere in the second half-hour they had stopped being a duke and a woman with a secret, and become, briefly, simply 2 people who liked the same things in the same quiet room. It was the happiest hour Cordelia had spent in 2 years. She knew it for what it was, even as she spent it. That was the worst of it, that she could feel the happiness, the warmth of it rising through her cold hands, like the first heat of a new-lit fire, and could not stop herself counting its cost, the way her thumb counted her pulse, because a thing this good, in her circumstances, was not a gift. It was a debt she did not know how she would ever pay. When the library clock struck 4, she rose too quickly, and gathered her shawl, and made her goodbyes too coolly, undoing in 30 seconds the warmth of an hour. And she saw him let her do it, saw him understand that the coolness was the price of the warmth, that she would always make herself pay for an hour of happiness with a quarter-hour of frost. And he did not call her back. He only stood and bowed, and said, "Mind the puddles in Bond Street, Miss Vane. They are deeper than they look." And let her go out into the rain, having shown her, without once raising his voice or his hopes, exactly what her life might be, if she ever once let the door stand open. She thought about the high pasture coming blue all the way home, and hated him a little for the picture of it, and could not, that whole wet evening, get the colour of it out of her head. He did not call a 4th time. Instead, he laid siege. The siege was conducted, as the Duke of Hartcliffe conducted everything, with patience and method, and an almost unbearable lack of fuss. There was no second book, no flowers, no letters that demanded an answer. There was, instead, a steady, deniable improvement in the small machinery of Cordelia's life that she could not trace and could not refuse, because she could never quite catch it happening. The coal merchant in the next street, who had stopped delivering in March, wrote to say that an old account of Sir Henry's had been found settled, and he would be honoured to resume. The mantua maker, who had been pressing for payment, sent instead, inexplicably, a length of grey-blue silk with her compliments, against future custom. A hamper arrived from a Yorkshire estate she had never visited. Game, a ham, a wheel of cheese, jars of preserves, addressed in a clerk's hand to Miss Vane, with the season's respects of the Hartcliffe tenantry, as though 400 Yorkshiremen had spontaneously decided to feed a stranger in London. She knew. Of course, she knew. Each thing alone was deniable. Together they were a man's hand, unmistakable, moving in her life like a tide moving a boat at anchor. And she could not return a tide. She could not write to the coal merchant and say, "Kindly stop being paid," She could not send back the ham to 400 imaginary tenants. He had found the one way to help her that she could not refuse without making herself ridiculous, and the cleverness of it, the care of it, made her so angry she could have wept. She went to confront him. She chose her ground. A public morning at the British Institution, where the new pictures were hung and half the ton drifted through in pursuit of nothing. The long rooms cool and bright, and smelling of varnish and dust, and the wet wool of damp coats. And a man could not raise his voice or his hopes. She found him in the long room before the clawed landscapes, alone for once, his hat in his hand, looking at a painted Italian afternoon with the absorbed stillness she had once mistaken for coldness, the bright painted gold of the canvas warm against the grey light from the high windows. "Your Grace will stop," she said quietly, coming to stand beside him, as though they were two strangers admiring the same canvas. "Stop admiring the picture. It is a very good picture. Stop paying my coal merchant." He did not look at her. He went on looking at the painted gold light over the painted river. "I have no notion what you mean. I have a great many coal merchants. I cannot be expected to keep track of them all. You know precisely what I mean. The coal, the silk, the ham, Your Grace, the Yorkshire ham, addressed from your tenants who have never heard my name. I will not be, I cannot be, managed. Do you understand me? I am not one of your estates to be put in order. I would rather sit in the cold." "I know you would," he said. "That is the whole difficulty. You would rather sit in the cold and freeze in the dark with the candles lit in the front windows so that the world thinks you are warm, and you would call it pride, and you would be wrong." He turned then, and the level grey attention came to rest on her, and it was not cold at all. It had never been cold. She had only needed it to be. "It is not pride, Cordelia. It is fear. You are afraid that if anyone sees the true state of things, they will see you as less. And you have decided that being seen as less is worse than being cold. I have simply declined to agree." She had no answer. She had armoured herself against charm, and against pity, and against persuasion, and he had used none of them. He had only told her the truth, plainly, the way he opened his own windows, and the truth had got under the armour where nothing else could reach. "You presume," she managed, "a great deal." "I do," he agreed. "I have presumed, for 2 years, that there was a reason you said no to me that had nothing to do with whether you could bear my company. I have presumed that the reason was something you were ashamed of, and that the shame was unnecessary, and that if I waited long enough, I might earn the right to be told it." He turned his ring once with his thumb. "I am tired of presuming, Miss Vane. Tell me I am wrong, and I will pay no more coal merchants, and call on you no more, and we shall be strangers, and I will bear it. But you will have to tell me to my face. You have never once told me to my face." A party of giggling debutantes drifted between them and the Claude, exclaiming. By the time they had passed, Cordelia had remade her composure, and her voice, when it came, was steady and light, and gave nothing away. "You are wrong," she said. She watched him receive it. She watched it land exactly as she had aimed it, and she watched, because she had learned, over 2 years, to read his face as closely as he read hers, that he did not believe her, and that he was going to honour the lie anyway, because she had asked him to her face, and that this, the honouring, cost him something she could see and could not name. "Then I am wrong," he said. "Forgive me." He bowed very correctly, and put on his hat, and left her alone in the long room before the painted golden afternoon. And she stood there until she was certain her face would obey her, and then she went home in the hired carriage, and sat in the cold front parlour, and did not, that whole evening, light a fire. Because she had won, and winning had never felt so much like the floor coming up to meet her. Julian did not go home from the British Institution. He walked. He gave the curricle to his man, and walked the length of Pall Mall and up St. James's in the thin cold, hat down, hands behind his back, with the look on his face that made his acquaintance cross the street to avoid greeting him. Not anger, which they would have understood, but a cold, methodical stillness that was a great deal worse, because it was the face of a man taking a thing apart to see how it had beaten him. She had lied to his face. He had asked her, plainly, for the one thing he had wanted for 2 years, to be told to his face, yes or no, true or false. And she had given him a clean, cool lie, and watched him take it. And the dreadful part, the part he turned over and over as he walked, was that he had let her. He had honored it. He had bowed and forgiven and put on his hat, because a man who has decided to love a proud woman must let her keep the one weapon she has left, even when the weapon is aimed at him. He understood that. He had built 2 years of his life on understanding it, and he was bitterly, coldly tired of it. He went, in the end, not home, but to the discreet first-floor chambers of Mr. Pelham, his man of business, in a quiet court off Lincoln's Inn, where a fire was always lit, and the clerks did not look up, and a duke might transact the particular sort of business that does not bear a name. Mr. Pelham was a small, dry, grey man who had served the Hartcliffe interest for 30 years, and had long ago stopped being surprised by anything his masters required of him. The Brook Street matter, Julian said, when he was seated, and a glass of the indifferent sherry he never drank had been set at his elbow, untouched, in the old ritual. How does it stand? Mr. Pelham consulted nothing. He carried it in his head. The coal account is settled through the quarter, Your Grace, the merchant resumed as instructed. The mantua maker has the silk on your credit, billed as future custom. The Yorkshire hamper went down a fortnight since. There is the matter of the carriage. He paused, delicately. The lady hires from the rank at Mount Street. It would be a small thing to settle the job-master's account 3 months forward, against her use, without her knowledge. You did not instruct it. I mention it only because the cold is hard, and a hired carriage is the one comfort a lady cannot well do without, and the easiest, if I may say, to render invisible. Julian looked at the fire for a while. Do it, he said. 3 months, through the job-master, never her. And Pelham? Your Grace. The debts. He turned the gold ring once with his thumb. He had thought of it 100 times in 2 years, and put it from him 100 times, because it was the one help she would never, could never forgive. The one tide too large to mistake for chance. Sir Henry's paper, the mortgage, the bonds, the vows. It is scattered across half the city. The creditors have given most of it up for bad. It could be bought in, quietly, through agents who do not know the principle. A man could gather the whole of it into one hand and hold it, and do nothing with it, and simply stand between her and the cliff, so that whatever else gave way, that would not. Mr. Pelham was quiet. Then, with the particular tact of a servant correcting a master he respects, a man could, Your Grace. I would counsel against it. So would I, said Julian. Tell me why, and let us see if your reason is the same as mine. Because debt is not coal, said Mr. Pelham. A lady may be kept warm and never know who paid the merchant. The kindness is small enough to vanish. But to hold the whole of a person's ruin in one hand is not a kindness, however it is meant. It is a power, and a proud lady, discovering it, and she would discover it, Your Grace, these things always come out, would not see a man who saved her. She would see a man who had owned her, and waited, and chosen the hour to be thanked. It would not free her. It would put her more deeply in the dark than her father ever did. He folded his dry hands. Coal she might forgive. That, never. That, said Julian softly, is precisely my reason. He rose. He had known he would not do it before he came. He had come, he understood now, only to hear his own counsel spoken in another man's voice, so that he could not later argue himself round. Leave the debts alone, Pelham. Whoever holds them, leave them. The coal and the carriage and the hams. Keep her warm at the edges, where she will never catch us. But the great matter stands as it stands. If she is to be saved from that, she must save herself, or let herself be asked. I will not buy her. I would sooner lose her honestly than keep her by a thing she could not forgive. He went out into the cold court, and did not know, could not have known, because the knowledge moved in rooms he was never admitted to either, that even as he gave the instruction to leave the debts alone, the debts had already changed hands, and the hand was not his, and it was already closing. It was at the opera, a week later, that Cordelia first felt the ground shift beneath her in public. She had not meant to go. But Lady Marchmont, an old friend of her mother's, and one of the dwindling few who still sent cards to Brook Street, had a box, and an empty seat, and a kind, insistent way. And an evening at the opera in another woman's box cost Cordelia nothing but the hire of the chair to carry her there. And so she went, in the violet gown, with her hair done as well as Besom could do it, and sat very straight at the front of the box, while the great gilt house filled below her, and the warm candle heat rose to press against her face, and the smell of wax and crowded silk and orange peel thickened in the air, and the orchestra tuned, a thin, sweet scraping under the murmur of 1,000 voices. She felt the looks before she understood them. A box is a public thing. One is on a small, lit stage of one's own, and Cordelia had learned long ago to read a house the way a sailor reads a sky. And tonight, there was weather in it. A fan tilted. Behind it, 2 heads inclined. A glass was raised, lowered, a word passed. In the box opposite, 2 matrons she knew slightly looked at her, and then, deliberately, did not. It was nothing one could name. It was everything. It was the particular cool curiosity of a room that has been told something. In the interval she found out what. Lady Marchmont came back from a circuit of the corridors, pink with indignation, and unable, being who she was, to keep it in. My dear, I shall say it plainly, for you had far better hear it from a friend. There is a story going about, that you are, forgive me, that Sir Henry left you nothing but the bills, and that you have spent 2 years living on credit and candle ends and a hired carriage, keeping up a front, and that now your creditors are closing, and you mean to mend it by securing Hartcliffe at last, having refused him twice when you could afford to. That the feint at the ball was no feint at all, but a piece of staging, to throw yourself into his arms before the whole ton. The old woman's hands shook on her painted fan, the sticks of it clicking. It is monstrous. I said so to Mrs. Ferrars's face. But it is being said, child, and it is being said with detail. The coal stopped in the spring, the carriage hired by the day, the very mortgage on the house named to the shilling. And a story with that sort of detail in it is not gossip. It is an account book read aloud. Someone who has been through your affairs paper by paper and wishes you ill. Have you such an enemy? Cordelia sat very still in the front of the lit box, with the great house murmuring below and the candle heat on her face, and felt the 2 years of careful front go thin as paper around her. Every true thing was in the story. That was its cruelty. She had lived on credit. She had kept up a front. The carriage was hired, and the candles burned in daylight, and the season's whole architecture of her dignity had been built over a pit, and someone had drawn back the boards and invited the ton to look in, and dressed the truth in just enough falsehood to make it shameful. The staged feint, the husband hunt, the cold calculation. They had taken her one private catastrophe and made it a public farce, and she could not deny the true parts without confessing them, and she could not confess them without becoming exactly the figure the story named. I have an enemy, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud, distantly, of how steady. I had not understood until this moment how able an enemy. Thank you, Lady Marchmont. You are a true friend, and I shall not forget it. Will you forgive me if I do not stay for the 3rd act? I find the house very warm. She went home in the hired chair through the cold streets, and she did not weep. And she sat a long time in the dark front parlour without lighting even one candle, because there was no longer any point in lighting them. The world driving past had been told exactly what was behind the glass, and a lit window deceived no one now. And in the dark she understood two things with great clarity. The first was that her enemy was Lady Sabine Caro. The story did not merely guess that she was poor, it knew the shape of her ruin from the inside. The coal stopped in March, the mortgage on the house, the precise hired grey from Mount Street, the things a person learned only by going through the Vane affairs, paper by paper. And there was no one who had cause to do that, and to wish her gone, but the cold blonde cousin who had watched her refuse a Hartcliffe and never forgiven it. The second was that the front had fallen, finally and forever, and that she had perhaps less time than she had thought, and that the floor, after 2 years, had at last begun in earnest to come up to meet her. What Cordelia did not know, what she could not have known, because the knowledge moved in rooms she was never admitted to, was that her debts had been changing hands for 3 months, quietly, through agents and a discreet man of business in Lincoln's Inn. Someone had been buying up the paper Sir Henry Vane had scattered across London like seed on stony ground. The mortgage on the Brook Street house, the note of hand to the wine merchant, the post-obit bonds, the gaming vows, the long unpaid bills that creditors had given up as bad and sold for pennies in the pound to anyone who would take them. One by one, the threads that held Cordelia Vane suspended over ruin had been gathered into a single hand. The hand was not the Duke's. It belonged to Lady Sabine Caro, the Duke's cousin, 27 years old, with the cold blonde beauty of a winter morning and a mind like a steel trap that had never in her life closed on the wrong ankle. And Lady Sabine had a reason, which she believed to be a good one, for wishing Cordelia Vane gone from London and from her cousin's sight forever. The reason had a name, and the name was Anthony. Anthony Caro had been Sabine's younger brother and Julian's closest friend from their school days. A laughing, reckless, golden young man who had bought a pair of colours and gone off with his regiment and not come home, lost to a fever in a garrison town overseas before he was 24, in a war that swallowed better men than him without noticing. Julian had mourned him as one mourns the brother one chose. Sabine had mourned him as the only person who had ever made the cold morning of her warm. And Sabine had got it into her head, wrongly, on a foundation of half-overheard things and her own grief looking for somewhere to land, that Cordelia Vane had been the cause of her brother's going, that Anthony had loved Cordelia, that Cordelia had refused him as carelessly as she later refused Julian, and that the refusal had sent the boy off to his regiment and his fever in a fit of wounded pride. It was not true. Anthony had been half in love with 3 women that season, and wholly in love with none of them. He had gone for the colours because his father bought them, and a Caro does what his father pays for. But grief does not check its sources. Sabine had decided that Cordelia Vane was the woman who had thrown away first her brother, and then 2 years ago her cousin, and that such a woman should not be permitted to throw away a third Hartcliffe at her leisure. So Sabine had bought the debts. And now, with the Duke calling 3 times in a week at the house in Brook Street, and a length of grey-blue silk going where it had no business, she judged that the moment had come to call them in. Cordelia found her out by accident, which is how Cordelia found out most things she was not meant to know. She had been admitted, on a wet Thursday, to Lady Sabine's morning room, summoned by a note so gracious it had made the back of her neck prickle. "Dear Miss Vane, we are too little acquainted. Will you take chocolate with me Thursday and mend it?" And she had been shown up too early, before her hostess was ready, and left to wait at the open door of the inner room. And there was Lady Sabine, not yet aware she was observed, standing at her writing table with her back half-turned, holding a small painted miniature flat in her palm. The morning light from the tall window fell across it, catching the gilt edge of the little frame, and the room smelled of beeswax and cold chocolate, and the hothouse lilies massed on the chimney-piece. Cordelia could not see the face on the ivory, but she could see Sabine's thumb move once, very slowly, across the painted surface, the way one touches a thing one has touched 10,000 times. And she could see, in the proud, cold profile, something come briefly unmade. The jaw loosen, the breath go out, the careful winter beauty soften into the plain, unguarded grief of a woman alone with the one face she could not get back. It lasted 3 heartbeats. Then a board creaked under Cordelia's foot, and Sabine's hand closed over the miniature and slid it into the writing table drawer in a single motion, and the winter came back down over her face like a sash window dropping. And she turned, perfectly composed, perfectly cold, perfectly the woman the world knew. "Miss Vane, how prompt you are." Cordelia stepped back from the threshold and came forward properly, as though she had seen nothing, because she had been taught by a master, by her own 2 years of practice, exactly how much it costs a proud woman to be caught grieving. And she would not, whatever else passed between them, be the one to charge that cost. "Lady Sabine, how kind of you to think of me." The chocolate was excellent. The conversation, for a quarter of an hour, was a duel fought with butter knives. "You are very brave, Miss Vane," Lady Sabine said at last, setting down her cup with the smallest possible click. "To go about so much this season, in your circumstances." "My circumstances are the same as any unmarried woman's, Lady Sabine. I find them very comfortable." "Do you?" The blonde head tilted. "I had understood, but I am sure I am misinformed, that Sir Henry left his affairs somewhat tangled. These things do get about. London is such a whispering place." She smiled. "I only mean that I should hate to see you overextend. The hire of a carriage, the keeping up of a house in Brook Street, the gowns one must have. It mounts, does it not? It mounts faster than one expects. A woman alone, with no fortune, and no near male relation to steady her, can find herself quite suddenly exposed." The word was placed with surgical care. Cordelia felt it go in. She kept her thumb away from her wrist by main force. "You are very good to concern yourself with my carriage, Lady Sabine." "I concern myself with my cousin," said Sabine, and the butter knives came off all at once, and the steel showed bare. "Hartcliffe is a man of strong loyalties, and longer patience than is good for him, Miss Vane. And he has it into his head to be kind to you. I have watched him be kind to you for 3 seasons. I watched him offer you his name 2 years ago, and I watched you laugh in his face and refuse it. And I have watched you spend every evening since, making certain he should see exactly how little you regretted it. And now he calls in Brook Street 3 times in a week, and silk goes where it should not go, and you take his coal and his Yorkshire hams, and you mean what? To let him try again, now that there is nothing left in your purse, and a duke begins to look less like an inconvenience and more like a roof?" "You mistake the matter entirely," Cordelia said, and her voice was very low and very level. "I have refused your cousin's coal as often as I am able, and I refused your cousin's hand 2 years ago, for reasons that are mine, and that I have told to no one, and that I shall certainly not tell to you." "No," Sabine agreed pleasantly. "You tell no one anything. That is rather the trouble with you, Miss Vane. A woman who will not be read cannot be trusted, and a woman who cannot be trusted should not marry into a family that has buried enough griefs without inviting another to the table." She rose. The audience was over. "I shall give you a friend's counsel, since we are now such friends. Leave London. Go to some quiet cousin in the country, and let my cousin forget you, as you have spent 2 years teaching him to do. Do it before your circumstances do it for you. They will, you know, sooner than you think. These things have a way of falling due all at once." Cordelia rose too. At the door she paused, and turned, and gave Lady Sabine the one, quiet, dignified truth she had it in her to give. "I am sorry for your brother," she said. "I did not know him well, but I am sorry. He had a kind laugh. I remember it." She watched the words land where the chocolate and the threats had not. She watched Lady Sabine, who had marshalled debts and agents and whispers and her whole cold competence to this single morning, go quite white, and then quite still, watched the proud mouth open on something, and then close on it, watched her cross to the window and stand with her back to the room and her hands gripped on the sill, saying nothing, dismissing nothing, until Cordelia let herself out, alone, and went down the great stairs past the footman, and out into the rain, where she could be safely, privately, comprehensively afraid. Because she had understood the threat now. Someone had her debts, and if it was Lady Sabine Carrow, then the whole of it, the house, the name, the candles in the daylight windows, the 2 years of standing very straight, could be brought down at this woman's pleasure, on a Thursday, over chocolate. She told no one. There was no one to tell. She went home and got out the worn black box where her father's papers lived, and made, by candlelight, a true accounting of her ruin for the first time in 2 years, and the figure at the bottom of the column was a number she had been refusing to write down, because writing it down made it real. She sat with it a long time. The candle burned down. Somewhere in the small hours she understood, with the cold clarity that comes when there is nothing left to protect, that she had perhaps a month before the threads gave way, and that there was exactly one thing in the world she could do to make herself safe, and that it was the one thing she had sworn she would never do. Marry a man for his roof. Marry the Duke of Hartcliffe, who had asked her twice, and would, she thought, ask a third time if she gave him the smallest opening, and who would never know, must never know, that she had taken him at last, not for love, but for cover. To do it would be to become precisely the woman Lady Sabine had named, the fortune hunter, the cold calculator, the woman who took a Hartcliffe for the roof when her purse ran dry. It would make every kind thing he had ever done, the bread, the open window, the spring gentian, into a debt she had collected. She would rather sit in the cold. She put the papers back in the box. She pinched out the candle, and in the dark of the cold front parlour, she made a different decision, the only honourable one she could find. She would refuse him a third time, finally and without appeal, before he could ask. She would let the threads give way and the house go and the world know. She would take whatever quiet country corner would have her and disappear into it with her ruin and her honour both intact. And she would never, in the country corner, light a candle in a daylight window again, because there would be no one driving past to deceive. He came to the country corner before she had even reached it. The frost had come early that year, and the morning she meant to begin packing the Brook Street house was a hard, bright one, the puddles in the area skinned with ice, the breath of the milk girl's pony hanging in the cold air. Cordelia was on her knees in the front parlour, wrapping her mother's 2 good Worcester cups in a torn petticoat, when Bessem showed the Duke of Hartcliffe in, unannounced, before Cordelia could be not at home, and stood in the doorway, with her arms folded, and an expression of frank and shameless triumph. "His Grace," said Bessem, "would not be turned off the step this time, miss, and I, for one, am glad of it." "Bessem?" "I'll be in the kitchen, miss, where I shan't hear a word." She was not going to the kitchen. She withdrew exactly far enough into the passage to hear every word, and pulled the door to within an inch. Cordelia got to her feet, a Worcester cup still in her hands, and faced him across the half-packed room. He took it in at a glance, the crate, the torn petticoat, the bare patches on the walls where the better pictures had already gone to the dealer, the cold grate. He took it all in, and his face did not change, and she loved him for that, and hated him for it in the same breath. "You are leaving," he said. "I'm going into the country, to a cousin, for my health." "For your health." He said it the way he had said no in the green anteroom, plainly, leaving the lie no room to live. "You are going into the country because there is nothing left, and you would rather vanish than be helped. And you have come to the end at last, and your answer to the end is to disappear before anyone can watch it happen." He set his hat down on the crate, on the bare deal where the candlestick had been, and the cold of the grateless room stood between them like a third person. I came to ask you to marry me. I've come to ask you for the third time, Cordelia, and I had a great many fine sentences ready, and I find now that I cannot remember a single one of them, so I shall simply say it. I love you. I have loved you since the first season, and I went on loving you through your laughing refusal and your 2 years of crossing rooms, and I should have said so a great deal sooner and saved us both a quantity of trouble. Marry me. Not for the roof. I do not care a straw about the roof. Marry me because I cannot, it seems, stop, and because I think, I have always thought, that you do not want to either. Here it was. The opening she had sworn never to give him, offered now by his own hand, with love in it and no calculation at all. And it was the love that decided her against it. Because she could take a roof from a man who offered a bargain, she could not take love from a man and give him, in exchange, a wife who had married him to escape Lady Sabine Carrow's hand on her debts. He had said, not for the roof, and that was exactly why she could not. To say yes now would be the one truly dishonest thing left to her, and she had given up everything else. She would not give up the last clean thing she owned. No, she said. She watched it go into him. She had refused him laughing once. She refused him now with her hands shaking around her mother's teacup, and she thought it must look to him like the same refusal wearing a sadder face. And she let him think it, because the truth was worse. I see, he said quietly. You do not see, but I am asking you, to your face, as you once said I never had. I am refusing you to your face, your grace, and I am asking you to believe that it is kindness, and to go, and not to come again. He stood very still. The frostlight came in hard and grey at the window, across the half-packed room, and the bare patches on the walls, and the cold black mouth of the empty grate, and the room smelled of dust and old paper, and the cold tallow of a candle pinched out. And in the silence, with his hat on the crate and her mother's cup shaking in her cold hands, Cordelia Vane believed the worst thing it was in her power to believe. And she believed it fully, because she had built her whole life out of believing it. He had only ever wanted to rescue her. The love he had just spoken was the love a strong man feels for a thing he can mend. She had been, all along, the broken account he could not leave unbalanced, the one estate in England not in his good order. He had courted her for the satisfaction of setting her right, the bread, the open window, the gentian, the coal, the third proposal. It had all been the patient charity of a man who could not pass a ruin without wanting to restore it. And she had nearly mistaken that charity for being chosen. He had wanted to save her. He had never wanted her. The two were one act, and she would not pretend otherwise. She set her teeth against the ache rising in her throat, and held the cup very still, until the rim of it stopped its small chatter against the saucer, and there was no sound in the cold room at all, but the wind worrying the loose sash. Then I will go, he said. He picked up his hat. At the door he stopped, his back to her, and she saw his thumb turn the ring once, the way it did before a hard truth. You will let the house go, and your name with it, sooner than let me near the trouble. I have known that about you for 2 years, and I have respected it, and I will respect it now. But I will say one thing, and then I will leave you to your crate. You have decided that to be helped is to be made small. You learned it from a man who would rather die owing every tradesman in London than let one of them see he could not pay. You learned it well. He opened the door. I had only hoped to teach you that there is another way to be brave. I see I am too late. Goodbye, Cordelia. He went out. She heard the front door. She heard the curricle. She stood in the middle of the cold, half-packed room with her mother's good Worcester cup in her 2 shaking hands, and she did not weep, and she did not sit down. And after a long while she set the cup very carefully in the crate among the torn petticoat, and the small click of china on china was the loudest sound in the house. Bessam came in. She did not pretend she had been in the kitchen. You great fool, she said, Not unkindly, the way she had said it across 30 years of buttoned stays and skinned knees. You great, brave, stupid fool. That man would have walked into the fire for you, and you've sent him off into the frost instead. And for what? For pride. For your father's pride that ruined the lot of us, and you carrying it on after him like it was the family plate. It is not pride, Bessem. Then what is it, miss? For I've known you since you were 6, and I cannot make it out. Cordelia looked at her, at the worn, good face that had stayed for love and back wages, the one person in the world to whom she had never had to lie, because Bessem already knew the worst. And she found, to her horror, that she was going to tell the truth, here, on this morning of all mornings, to her maid. Someone has bought my debts, she said. All of them. The house, the bonds, everything my father scattered. I do not know who, but I am almost sure, it is Lady Sabine Caro, who hates me, and who could call the whole of it in tomorrow and put me in the street, and who told me to leave London before she does. And if I had said yes to him, if I marry him now, today, when I am one woman's whim away from utter ruin, then I am exactly what she says I am. A woman who took a Heartcliff for the roof. I cannot be that, Bessem. I have nothing left but not being that. Do you see? Bessem was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the terrible practicality of the servants' hall, And does he know that someone's got your debts? No, no one knows. I have only just... Then you've done worse than sent him off, miss, said Bessem. You've sent him off blind. You've let him think you don't want him, when the truth is you want him so bad you'd ruin yourself sooner than have him on the wrong terms. That's not pride, miss. That's just... backwards. She picked up the torn petticoat and folded it briskly. The conversation evidently concluded as far as she was concerned. If it were me, I'd find out who's got the paper, and I'd tell that one to their face, same as you told the Duke, and I'd let the chips fall. But it's not me. I'm only the maid as you can't pay. She paused at the door. I'd stay for nothing, miss. You know that. It's the staying I mind, not the wages. Pity you can't say the same to him. She went out. Cordelia stood among the crates a long time. The same slander that had emptied the third act of the opera around Cordelia reached Heartcliff House by a shorter road, and it found the Duke at breakfast, and it did not improve his morning. He heard it first from his mother, who relayed it the way she relayed everything, as a thing she had been told to be sorry about and was privately rather enjoying. And he heard the detail in it, the cut-off coal, the hired carriage, the mortgaged house, the staged faint. And he set down his cup very carefully, because the detail told him, as it had told Cordelia, exactly who had taken the trouble. This was not the gossip of a drawing room that had merely guessed at a lady's want. It was the inventory of someone who had gone through the Vane affairs line by line, who knew to the shilling how the house stood and what was owed and to whom. There was only one person in London who had reason to have studied Cordelia Vane's ruin that closely, and who wished its owner gone. He found Sabine in her morning room, among the hothouse lilies, going over accounts with the cold composure of a general the morning after a battle she believes she has won. She rose when he was announced. She did not, he noticed, look surprised to see him. Julian, you have the look of a man who has heard something. I have heard a great deal. He did not sit. He stood in the middle of her elegant, cold room, with his hat still in his hand, and he did not turn his ring. And that stillness, which she knew as well as anyone living, made her set down her pen. There is a story going about town, Sabine, about Miss Vane. It is told with a great deal of detail. The colour of a gown, the state of a carriage, the arrangement of a faint. It is told by someone who knows her affairs intimately and wishes her destroyed. And I have come to ask you, to your face, since I am told to my face is the only honest way to ask anything. Is it you? The lilies breathed their thick sweetness into the silence. Sabine's chin came up. And if it is? Then you have done a wicked thing, said Julian very quietly. And I should like to understand why. Because I have known you all my life, and I did not think you wicked. Foolish sometimes, proud always, not cruel. So tell me why a woman I love is being torn to pieces in every drawing room in London with my cousin's hand behind it. And tell me to my face. Because she killed Anthony, Sabine said. It came out of her flat and terrible, a thing she plainly believed to the root of her. And for a moment Julian only looked at her, the breath gone out of the room. Anthony was lost to a fever, he said, in a garrison 3,000 miles from here. You know that. I had the letter. I read it to you. He went because she refused him. Sabine's voice did not rise, but something behind it had cracked. And through the crack came 2 years of grief wearing the mask of certainty. He loved her, that first season, your precious Miss Vane. And she laughed at him the way she later laughed at you. And he bought his colours within the month, and was gone within the quarter, and lost within the year. She throws Caro's away, Julian. She threw away my brother, and she threw away you. And now her purse is empty, and she means to pick you up again off the floor she dropped you on, and I will not. I will not stand in this house and watch another of us spend himself on a woman who cannot love anything but her own straight back. I would rather the whole town thought her a fortune hunter. At least the whole town would be right. Anthony, said Julian, was half in love with the Mrs. Fanshawe, and wholly in love with the cavalry, and he bought his colours because your father bought them for him, as your father had been threatening to do since the boy was 16. You were at Bath. You did not see it. I did. He never offered for Cordelia Vane in his life. He had not the attention to offer for anyone for longer than a waltz. He watched the words go into her, and find no purchase, slide off the armour of 2 years' need, and he understood, with a weary compassion that surprised him, that she could not afford to believe him, that she had built the whole cold edifice of her competence on the one warm certainty that her brother's loss had a cause and a face, and that to take the face away was to leave her alone with the truth she could not carry, that he had gone for nothing, and been gone for nothing, and that there was no one to blame, and never had been. You have made a story to live in, he said, more gently, because the true one has no door in it. I am sorry, Sabine. I am sorrier than I can say. But you have used your grief to ruin an innocent woman, and I will not let it stand. I am going to put the truth about with as much detail and as many drawing rooms as you have used for the lie, beginning this afternoon. And I am going to marry her, if she will have me. And you are going to have a very uncomfortable season. And at the end of it, I hope you will still be my cousin, because I have few enough people I have known all my life, and I do not want to lose another. But that is your choosing now, not mine. He put on his hat. Where is she? Sabine asked, before she could stop herself. And the question, the small, involuntary human worry under it, was the first crack he had seen in her armour in 2 years. Gone, I think, said Julian. Refused me 3 days since, and gone to ground the way she does. I am told there is a cousin in the country. He paused at the door. If you have any further mischief planned, Sabine, do it quickly. I mean to spend the rest of my life making it not matter. He went out and left her standing among the lilies, with her accounts open and her pen dry, and the morning light falling, as it always fell, across the locked drawer, where the miniature lay. It was the miniature that decided her in the end. She had carried it about with her for a week without knowing why. The memory of it, rather, of Lady Sabine's thumb moving across the small painted face, of the proud, cold beauty coming unmade for 3 heartbeats over a boy with a kind laugh who had not come home. She had recognized the grief because she had the same one folded up inside her own chest. The grief of a person who would rather break than be seen breaking, and she thought, I will not fight that woman with whispers and agents as she has fought me. I have nothing to fight with. But I have the one thing she cannot armor against, because I have it too. I have seen her with the window down over her face. So she did not flee to the country. She put on the violet gown, the one good gown, and she had Besom dress her hair as well as it could be dressed, and she took the hired carriage, paid, by some grace she did not examine, 3 months in advance from an account she had not opened, to Lady Sabine Carrow's house, and she sent up not a card, but a single line on a torn half-sheet. I know who has my debts. I am come to ask you, to your face, to do as you will with them. C. Vane. She was admitted at once. Lady Sabine was at the writing table where Cordelia had first seen her with the miniature, and the morning light was the same, and for a moment the two women only looked at each other across the cold, elegant room. You came, Sabine said. I confess I did not think you would. I thought you would run. I had every intention of running, Cordelia said. I am told it is a fault of mine. She stood very straight. She did not press her thumb to her wrist. You hold my debts. I have come to say that you may do as you like with them. Call them in tomorrow if you wish. Put me in the street. I will not marry your cousin to save myself. She drew a breath. The cold, elegant room held it. I refused him 3 days ago, in a half-packed parlour, and I refused him for exactly the reason you would approve of, Lady Sabine. Because to take him now, in my circumstances, would make me the creature you believe me to be. So you have won, you see. You wanted me gone, and I am going. I came only because you were owed the truth to your face, and because I find I am tired of being a woman no one can read. I refused him, because I love him. That is the whole of it. I have ruined myself sooner than have him on terms that would shame us both, and that is not pride, whatever you think, and it is certainly not calculation, and you may do with my debts precisely as your conscience directs. It was the longest speech of her life, and at the end of it she was shaking, and she had told a near stranger, who hated her, the truth she had not been able to tell the man she loved, and the absurdity of that was so complete that she nearly laughed. Lady Sabine did not speak for a long moment. She had gone, during the speech, from triumph to attention, to something Cordelia could not name. Now she rose, and crossed not to the window this time, but to the writing-table drawer, and took from it the small painted miniature, and held it out flat on her palm, so that, at last, Cordelia could see the face on the ivory. A laughing, golden young man, painted at perhaps 20, with a careless charm in the set of his mouth that not even a journeyman miniaturist had been able to flatten. You said you remembered his laugh, Sabine said. Her voice was not cold now. It was not anything. It was stripped. At my chocolate. You said he had a kind laugh. No one says that to me. They say, your loss, and so promising, and cut off in his prime. And they mean nothing by it, and I hate them. You said he had a kind laugh, as though you had heard it. Had you heard it? Twice, Cordelia said. At the Almack's of my first season. He told me a very bad joke about a bishop and a barouche, and laughed at it himself before he reached the end, which spoiled the joke entirely. And it was the kindest thing anyone said to me that whole terrifying evening. I was a frightened girl in a borrowed gown, and your brother made me laugh at a joke he could not even finish. I have remembered it for 6 years. She watched the painted face on the ivory, the careless gold of it, and went on more quietly. I am sorry he is gone. I am sorry I let you believe, all this while, but I was the woman who threw him away. I was not. I never was. He was half in love with the Mrs. Fanshawe, and wholly in love with the cavalry. And he went for the colours because your father bought them, and none of it was me. And I should have said so a week ago over your chocolate, except that you frighten me almost as much as I appear to frighten you. There was a silence in the cold, elegant room. Then Lady Sabine Carrow set the miniature down on the writing table, face up, where the morning light could reach it, and did something Cordelia had not once seen her do. She let her shoulders down. I have done you a great wrong, Miss Vane, she said. I built a whole architecture of blame out of nothing because the truth, that he went for no reason at all, that he was lost for no reason at all, that there was no one to blame and nothing to be done and never had been, was more than I could carry. It was easier to hate you. I'm ashamed to say how much easier. She drew a breath. I bought your debts to drive you out. I see now that I have spent 3 months and a great deal of money to punish a woman for a crime she did not commit, in order to spare myself a grief I cannot be spared. It is the stupidest thing I have ever done, and I am accounted clever. Lady Sabine, let me finish, or I shall lose the nerve. She crossed to the table, took up a thick, folded packet of papers tied with red tape that had been sitting, Cordelia now saw, ready at her elbow, as though Sabine had half known, summoning her, what this morning might become, and she carried it across the room and laid it down on the small table at Cordelia's side, within her reach. These are your debts, all of them. The Brook Street mortgage, the bonds, the vows, every scrap of your father's paper I could gather. I had meant, when I sent for you, to spread them on the table between us and watch you understand what I held. I find I have no appetite for it after all. Cordelia looked down at the packet. She did not move to take it. Take it up, Sabine said. Open it. You will not believe me else, and you have every reason not to believe me. Cordelia took up the packet. Her fingers found the red tape and loosed it, and she unfolded the topmost paper, and it was the mortgage on the Brook Street house, her father's house, in a clerk's copper plate, and across the foot of it, in a hard, square, decided hand she did not recognize but Sabine plainly did, was written a single line, freshly inked, the ink not a day old. Cancelled. The debt is discharged in full. No sum is owing. S. Caro. And beneath it, on each successive paper as she turned them with shaking fingers, the same hand, the same line, again and again. A discharge written across the whole of her ruin. Cancelled. Cancelled. No sum is owing. Cancelled. I wrote them out this morning, Sabine said quietly. Before you came, on the chance that you would come and that you would be what you have turned out to be. There is nothing owing, Miss Vane. The house is yours, free. I am sorry. It is a poor word for 3 months' malice, but it is the one I have. I am sorry. Cordelia held the discharged papers in her 2 hands and found that she could not, for a moment, speak at all. Why, she managed at last, are you telling me this, instead of simply burning the papers and letting me think the threads gave way on their own? You could have done me the kindness and kept the credit of the malice. No one would ever have known. Because you came to my face, Sabine said, when you might have run. Because you told a woman who hates you that you loved my cousin sooner than take him on cover, which is the single most foolish, honourable thing I have heard in a London drawing room in my life. And I have heard a great deal of folly, and very little honour. A ghost of the old steel flickered, but it was warmer now, almost a tease. And because, Miss Vane, if I am to be cousin to your Duchess, and I rather think I am, I should prefer her to know from the beginning that I am capable of being wrong, and capable of saying so. It will save us both a great deal of trouble across a great many Christmases. I refused him, Cordelia said. 3 days ago. Finally. I told him not to come again. Then you must refuse him, said Sabine, with the brisk competence of a woman returning to ground she understood. And quickly, before he does something noble and irreversible, which is a family failing. He has gone down to Hartcliffe. He told my aunt he meant to stay until the spring. She was already crossing to the bell, her grey skirts hushing over the carpet. Every trace of the morning's malice burned off her now like frost off glass. You will catch him on the North Road if you leave within the hour. I shall lend you my travelling carriage. It is faster than your hired grey, and the horses are mine and paid for. Go and put off that gown for a warmer one. The frost is hard, and the North Road is no place for violet silk. And Miss Vane. Cordelia, at the door, turned. Sabine had picked up the miniature again and stood with it in her palm, looking at the laughing, painted face. And when she spoke, it was almost gentle. "Thank you for remembering the joke about the bishop. No one else does. I had begun to think I had made him up." He was easy to overtake, in the end, because he was not hurrying. Sabine's travelling carriage caught the Hartcliffe chaise at the second posting in out of London, where the Duke had stopped to change horses, and was standing in the cold yard with his coat collar up, and his hands behind his back, looking at nothing, with the particular stillness of a man who has decided to feel nothing for a great while, and is finding the resolution harder going than he expected. The frost lay white on the cobbles. The ostler's breath smoked. A dog barked somewhere behind the stables. Cordelia got down before the carriage had properly stopped, which was reckless, and turned her ankle on the icy cobbles, which was undignified. And the cold of the yard struck through her thin gloves and bit at her cheeks as she arrived in front of the Duke of Hartcliffe, out of breath, the air sharp and raw in her throat, limping slightly, and clutching a packet of cancelled debts to her chest, like a woman who had robbed a bank. He stared at her. For the first time in 3 years, she saw the level composure go entirely out of his face. "Cordelia, what in God's name?" "I lied to you," she said, "in the parlour. I refused you to your face, and I asked you to believe it was kindness, and it was a lie. And I have come a day's frost to say so, because Bessem told me I had sent you off blind. And she was right. And I am tired. Julian, I am so tired of standing very straight." "You are limping." "I turned my ankle getting down. It is nothing. Will you let me finish? I have rehearsed it the whole of the North Road, and I shall forget it if you fuss." "I am not fussing." He was, very slightly, his hand already half out to steady her, and she put the packet of papers into it instead, hard, against his chest. "Read the top one," she said. He looked at her, and then at the packet, and then he loosed the red tape one-handed. The other had come to rest, without either of them deciding it should, at her elbow, the way it had in the green anteroom, ready to catch a thing he had not yet decided to trust. And he unfolded the topmost paper there in the cold inn-yard, with the frost on the cobbles, and the ostlers pretending not to watch. And she saw him read the mortgage, and the line across the foot of it in his cousin's hand, and she watched the whole thing arrive in him at once. "Sabine," he said, "she bought them. All of them, months ago. She thought I had thrown away your friend, her brother, as I had thrown away you, and she meant to drive me out of London with them, and she summoned me this morning to spread them on the table and frighten me, and instead—" Cordelia drew a breath. "Instead, I told her to her face that I had refused you because I loved you, and that I would rather be ruined than take you for a roof. And somewhere in the saying of it, she stopped being my enemy. She cancelled the lot. The house is mine, free. I came to you with nothing 2 years ago, and I would have married you with nothing 3 days ago, except I could not bear that you should think, that anyone should think. Julian, look at me. I am trying to tell you the thing I have never told anyone." "Then tell me," he said, "to my face, as I once said you never had." "I refused you 2 years ago," she said, "because my father was gone, and had left me nothing but debts and a name and the bills, and I knew it the day I buried him, and I have known it every day since. And I have lit candles in the front windows in broad daylight, so the world driving past would think there was warmth in the house when there was none. And when you asked me to marry you in your library, all I could think was that you would find out, that you would lift the lid on the vain affairs and see the rot of them, and that you would marry me anyway out of honor, because you are the most honorable man I have ever known, and that I would spend my whole life as the Duchess you took on out of charity. I could not bear it." The cold of the inn-yard pressed at her throat. Somewhere behind the stables, the dog had begun to bark again, steady and far off, and she made herself say the rest of it over the sound. "So I laughed, and I said no, and I let you think me cold, because being thought cold was easier than being seen poor. That is the secret, Julian. That is the whole great secret I have guarded for 2 years. I was not too proud to have you. I was too proud to be saved by you." Her voice cracked at last, here, with the frost in her throat, the breath of it smoking white between them. And I was wrong. And Bessem told me I was backwards. And she was right. And I'm asking you, if the offer is still anywhere about you after everything, I'm asking you to ask me again. He had gone very still through all of it. Now he folded the packet of cancelled papers once, slowly, and put it inside his coat, against his heart, as though it were a thing worth keeping. And he took her cold, ungloved hand in both of his warm ones, there in the inn yard, in front of God and the ostlers and the smoking horses. I knew, he said.
You... what?
I knew about the debts, about your father, about the candles in the daylight windows. I saw them, the day you turned me off the step. And I understood them, and I went home and sat up till 3 in the morning hating a man I had never met for what he had done to you. His thumb moved across her knuckles, warm against the cold of them. I have known nearly the whole of it for 2 years, Cordelia, and I never said so, because I understood that the one thing you could not survive was being seen to be seen. The horses stamped in the traces behind him, and Ostler clucked at them and led them off, and the yard quieted to the hiss of the wind across the frosted cobbles. So I paid your coal merchant in secret, and I sent silk by way of the mantua maker, and I invented 400 Yorkshire tenants with a fondness for sending hams to strangers, and I told myself it was enough to keep you warm from a distance, and never let you catch me at it. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. But I would have gone on doing it all my life, in secret, sooner than make you feel rescued. So you see, we are very well matched. You would rather freeze than be helped, and I would rather help you forever than let you know you were being helped. We are each as foolish as the other. I think we had better marry before we do ourselves a serious injury. She laughed. It came out of her broken and astonished, the second laugh in a week, and once it had started she could not stop it. She stood in the freezing inn yard with her hand in both of his, and laughed until the tears stood in her eyes and froze on her lashes, and the Duke of Hartcliffe watched her laugh with an expression of such naked, undefended joy that one of the ostlers turned away out of decency. 400 Yorkshire tenants, she got out, with a fondness for hams. They are a sentimental people. You wrote that clerk's note yourself, with the season's respects of the Hartcliffe tenantry. I have it still. I knew it was you, and I could not prove it, and it made me so angry I could have struck you. I know, he said gravely. I counted on the anger. It seems safer than the alternative. Cordelia. Yes. Marry me. Not for the roof. You have your own roof now, free and clear. You may keep the candles lit at midday in every window of it, and I shall never say a word. Marry me because I love you, and because you have just come a day's frost to tell me the truth to my face, which is the bravest thing I have ever watched anyone do, and because I find I cannot, it seems, stop. I have tried. I gave it a very serious attempt as far as the second posting in. I have no aptitude for it. Yes, she said. Yes, for love, and not for the roof, and never, ever for charity. Yes, Julian. He did not kiss her in the inn yard, because there were ostlers, and because he was, even undone, a man who opened his own windows and minded the proprieties for her sake. But he handed her up into Sabine's warm travelling carriage, with a tenderness that was its own confession, and he climbed up after her, and he gave the order to turn the horses back toward London. And somewhere on the cold, bright road south, with the frost fields sliding white past the window, and the warmth of him reaching her through her thin pelisse and her cold hand thawing slowly between his 2 warm ones, he kissed her at last. Once. Slow, his lips warm against her cold mouth, careful as a man handling a thing he has wanted past hoping for. And Cordelia Vane, who had spent 2 years standing very straight, let herself for the first time lean her cheek to the rough wool of his shoulder, and rest there. They were married in the spring, when the hawthorn was out along the Yorkshire lanes, and the spring gentian, the real one, blue past believing, was flowering on the high pasture above the house. It was not a grand wedding. Cordelia would not have a grand wedding. She had had quite enough, she said, of doing things grandly for the benefit of a world driving past. They were married in the small grey stone church at the edge of the Hartcliffe lands, where the cold of the old walls held even in spring, and the air smelled of damp stone and beeswax candles and the green of cut hawthorn. With the tenantry, the real ones, who did in fact exist, and who had been let in on the whole story by Bessem, and now regarded their new duchess with the proprietary fondness of people who believed, more or less, that they had personally sent her several hams, packed into the pews in their Sunday best. And Lady Sabine Carow stood up as one of the witnesses, in grey, with the laughing painted miniature of her brother pinned, where only Cordelia knew to look for it, beneath her collar at the throat. Afterward, at the breakfast, Sabine found Cordelia by the long windows that looked out over the parterre, where the gravel was warming under the first real sun of the year. "I have a wedding gift for you," Sabine said, "and it is a poor one, and you will pretend to like it." She put into Cordelia's hands a small, flat parcel, the paper cool and crisp, and inside it was a miniature, newly painted on fresh ivory, of a sprig of spring gentian, blue past believing, exactly as it grew on the high pasture. "I had it done from the plate in that book my cousin sent you. He told me about the book. He tells me a great deal now. It is most unlike him, and I find I rather enjoy it." The steel wavered, and held, and softened. "I thought you should have a thing that was given because someone had been thinking, and not because anyone owed you anything. Anthony would have liked you, Cordelia. He liked anyone who would laugh at a joke before it was finished. I am glad in the end that I was wrong about you. I am not often glad to be wrong." "Thank you," Cordelia said, and meant it past all her capacity to say it, and the two of them stood by the warming window in a peace that neither had thought, 6 months before, that they would ever come to. Bessem, who had come to Yorkshire because there was no power on earth that could have kept her in Clapham while her girl was made a duchess, found Cordelia later, when the breakfast was over and the guests were thinning, standing alone in the morning room with the spring sun coming in. "Well, miss," she said. "Your Grace, I should say, and I shan't get used to it before Michaelmas." She looked her over, the violet gone now for a soft spring blue, the colour come back into her face, the thumb that no longer crept to the wrist. "You've a better look about you, like a woman who stopped holding the door shut against the weather." "I have stopped, Bessem. It is a very strange thing not to be holding the door shut. I keep reaching for it, and finding it open." "Aye, well." Bessem busied herself with the curtain, gruff against the feeling in the room. "It opens easier than you'd think, once you let it. Most things do." She paused. "He's a good man, miss. Shoulders aside." "Shoulders aside," Cordelia agreed gravely. "He is a good man." "I never doubted it from the book," said Bessem, and went out, satisfied, to terrorize the Yorkshire kitchen, which had been waiting for her all afternoon, without knowing it. That evening, when the house was quiet, and the long northern dusk was coming down blue over the pastures, Julian found his wife in the green morning room. They had a green room here too. She had asked for it, and he had not asked why, and she had loved him for not asking. Sitting by the window with the new miniature of the gentian propped on the sill, where the last light could reach it. He had a cup in his hands. He set it down on the little table by her chair, with no ceremony at all, and stood back. "What is this?" "Beef tea," he said. "And there is bread coming, thin with butter. I find I have developed a fixed determination that you shall never again fail to eat before a party, and I mean to enforce it for the next 60 years, beginning tonight, when there is no party at all, and you are not in the least faint, simply so that you understand I am serious." She looked at the cup, and at him, and at the small blue-painted flower on the sill, catching the last of the light. And she felt something that had been clenched in her for 2 years, finally, completely let go. You opened the window again, she said. The casement stood ajar. The cool came in off the pastures, wet grass and far wood smoke, and the green smell of the spring night. I find it goes faster than ringing twice. She took up the bread when it came, and ate it, slowly. And this time she did not bring any disdain to it at all. He sat down across from her, near enough to catch her if the floor should ever come up to meet her again, which it would not, now. But he would sit near enough all the same, for 60 years, on the chance. You caught me, she said, before the floor could, at the very first. I had been watching the door, he said, for 2 years. I was well placed. Outside, on the high pasture, the spring gentian closed its blue against the coming dark, the way it had opened that morning, and would open again. She set the empty cup down without a sound, and reached across the little table, and put her warm hand over his. Without sugar, she said. You remembered. I remember everything you have ever told me, said the Duke of Hartcliffe. It is the only fortune I have ever cared to keep.